My name is Jack Slomka, and the topic that I researched was, does implicit bias have an effect on the attachment of adopted children? Now, that's a lot to unpack, so let's start with the biggest point, attachment. Now, attachments are the root of cognitive development. They are formed from prolonged exposure, and usually in the first year of life. Now, cognitive includes social and emotional, so which means attachments teach kids emotional coping mechanisms, social cues. All of those foundations are laid with the attachment. Now, when we're talking about attachment theory, we generally refer to the primary attachment, which is usually the most important. And usually it's formed between the mother and the child. However, the mother is really replaceable with whoever is considered the primary caregiver in this scenario. Now, in adoptions, a new attachment has to form. And to show you how prevalent of an issue that is, from the years of 1999 to 2018, there was a total of 275,000 international adoptions in the United States. 67% of these were ages 2 or under. Now, the reason special focus is given to international adoptions is because they are more likely to suffer from the implicit bias that will be talked about later in the presentation. And these adoptive attachments often have problems that can extend far beyond the childhood years. So, research suggests there is a connection between implicit bias and struggles to form attachments, especially in adoptions. Now, when researching this, I looked at the two topics of attachment theory and implicit bias separately before putting them together, which is what I will do now. Attachment theory is the main crux of child development. It was coined by John Bowlby, a child development psychologist in the 60s, and the main focus is, as previously stated, the primary attachment. It's the basis of cognitive development in two ways. The first is the child sees the primary attachment as a safe, secure base which they can return to as they explore the world if they ever get scared or uncomfortable. And secondly, in a study by the Australasian Journal of Early Childhood Development, it was found that most children imitate the behavior of their primary attachment in order to learn and grow. Now, when talking about the primary attachment, we can define it in two ways, stable or unstable, which is just a fancy way of saying healthy or unhealthy. A stable attachment will result in healthy development. That means healthy coping mechanisms, healthy social cues, everything that I said before. Well, an unstable attachment might result in what is known as reactive attachment disorder. Reactive attachment disorder manifests in two ways in children. The first is that the child becomes extremely attention-seeking and vying for the parent's attention at all times. And then the second is that the child becomes extremely aloof and cold towards the parent. Now, when it comes to adoptions, there can also be what we call a struggle to acclimate, because the acclimation period, those first few months after the adoption is completed, when everything is just settling in and settling down, that is when an attachment is going to form. However, it's especially hard for older children, specifically over the age of 4. And for these older children, this period is super important because an unstable relationship during this period will lead to an unstable attachment. Now, the other half of my research, implicit bias, is a genetic subconscious idea mainly found in children, specifically young children, before they have made the switch from basic instinct to cognitive thought that is caused by cognitive development, and can be best described as a preference for people who resemble you. That means if you're a child, when you see someone, your mind unconsciously will make connections like if they resemble you, that they genetically resemble you, like you will automatically be predisposed to listen to them, be receptive to what they have to say. And that is what implicit bias does. Now, I've mentioned previously these struggles to acclimate because the acclimation period is so volatile, like there can be many different causes, and they can lead to disruptions, which is what we call failed adoption. Now, the first of these and the most prevalent is what we call resource availability. Now that means resource availability includes access to education, clothes, food, shelter. The list goes on. And it's more of a marker of socioeconomic status that you are able to properly care for the child in your care. Now, there are genetic reasons known as genetic happiness, and it's basically saying that 1/3 of people believe that genetics have a very real and tangible effect on your overall happiness. And while it doesn't mention implicit bias by name, we do know that implicit bias is a genetic subconscious idea, as previously stated. Now, the other troubles that can result in a disruption is a very long list and can include factors such as the age of the child, how many times they've been moved, any problems or incidents that carry over from previous homes. All of these can result in a disruption. And despite all that, there is some resistance against adoptions from external parties, specifically transracial adoptions have a clear external force pushing against them because they believe that the child is being removed from their parental culture and supplanted into a new culture, being cut off from that parental culture. Now, reviewing all this evidence, the connection between implicit bias and struggles to form attachments in adoptions is highly plausible and can be seen. However, I suggest more research on the overlap between the two is desperately needed because the best results come from a large amount of qualitative research. Now, with this conclusion, there are some limitations. The first being that lack of comprehensive research that I just mentioned, and that I believe could point this in a more appropriate direction. The second being an attachment can improve over time despite age or other factors like the ones I mentioned previously that made it seem that adoptions always fail all the time, because this attachment can improve as seen through a study by the University of Rome, which was relatively small in nature but did show improvement over a short period of time. And finally, implicit bias isn't the most common, and it is actually one of the more least common struggles. So it doesn't come up as often, but it should be under review during the process. And that actually comes up in the implications of this conclusion, that implicit bias could be considered as a possible struggle in the adoption process and reviewed as such during adoption struggles. And second, that other subconscious genetic codes in children could be considered during that time period before cognitive development has fully propelled the child into a state of complete cognitive thought. Thank you.